Welcome to my little corner of the internet, where we celebrate creativity and growth. We extend a warm welcome to you as we discuss and analyze Montague Summers in this video. Augustus Montague Summers, 10 April 1880 – 10 August 1948, was an English author, clergyman, occultist, and teacher. He initially prepared for a career in the Church of England at Oxford and Lichfield, and was ordained as an Anglican deacon in 1908. He then converted to Roman Catholicism and began styling himself as a Catholic priest. He was, however, never affiliated with any Catholic diocese or religious order, and it is doubtful that he was ever actually ordained to the priesthood. He was employed as a teacher of English and Latin while independently pursuing scholarly work on the English drama of the 17th century. The latter earned him election to the Royal Society of Literature in 1916. Noted for his eccentric personality and interests, Summers became a well-known figure in London society as a result of the publication of his History of Witchcraft and Demonology in 1926. That work was followed by other studies on witchcraft, vampires, and werewolves, in all of which he professed to believe. Summers also produced a modern English translation, published in 1929, of the 15th Witch Hunter's Manual, the Malleus Maleficarum. He has been characterized as arguably the most seminal 20th century purveyor of pop culture occultism. Get ready to uncover the mysteries surrounding early life as we navigate its intriguing terrain. Montague Summers was the youngest of the 7 children of Augustus William Summers, a rich banker and justice of the peace in Clifton, Bristol. Montague was educated at Clifton College. Early on, he rebelled against his father's evangelical, low-church religiosity, embracing instead a ritualistic Anglo-Catholicism. In 1899, Summers entered Trinity College, Oxford, as a student of theology. Although an avid reader and Latinist, Summers neglected his official studies. In 1904, he received a 4th-class Bachelor of Arts B.A. degree, promoted in 1906 to a Master of Arts M.A. degree, as per the custom of the University of Oxford. Summers then continued his religious training at Lichfield Theological College with the intention of becoming a priest in the Church of England. Summers self-published his first book, Antinos and Other Poems, in 1907. Its contents reflected the influence of the literary decadent movement while showcasing Summers' own preoccupations with pederasty, medievalism, Catholicism, and the occult. Summers was ordained as deacon in 1908 and worked as a curate in Bath and Bitton, near Bristol. He never proceeded to higher orders, however, probably because of rumors of his interest in Satanism and accusations of sexual impropriety with young boys, for which he was tried and acquitted. Summers' interest in Satanism probably derived in part from his reading of the works of the French writer Joros Karl Huysmans, particularly the novel Baz 1891, which includes an account of a black mass. Summers himself later claimed in private conversation to have attended black masses in Bruges, Brighton, and London. There are also testimonies from former associates, including the poet J. Redwood Anderson, suggesting that Summers may even have conducted such ceremonies himself. As we transition, let's shed light on conversion to Catholicism and its relevance to our ongoing exploration. In 1909, Summers converted to Catholicism and began studying for the Catholic priesthood at St. John's Seminary, Woolwich, receiving the clerical tonsure on 28 December 1910. After 1913, he styled himself as the Reverend Alphonsus Joseph Mary Augustus Montague Summers and acted as a Catholic priest, even though he was never a member of any Catholic order or diocese. Whether he was actually ordained as a priest is disputed. According to some sources, Summers had transferred from the seminary in Woolwich to the Diocese of Nottingham, but the local bishop refused to ordain him after receiving incriminating reports of Summers' prior conduct. Other sources claim that Summers travelled to continental Europe and was ordained there by Cardinal Mercier in Belgium or by Archbishop Guido Maria Conforti in Italy. According to yet another version of events, Summers was ordained as a priest by Ulrich Vernon Herford the self-styled Bishop of Mercia and one of several episcopi vagantis wandering bishops operating in Britain at the time. Let's now shift our focus to work as a teacher and explore the ways in which it shapes our perspective. From 1911 to 1926, Summers found employment as a teacher of English and Latin. Among other posts, he was an assistant master at the junior school of the Central School of Arts and Crafts in Holborn. In 1922, he became senior English master at Brockley County School in South East London. Despite his eccentric appearance and habits, he was apparently a successful and well-respected teacher. Summers gave up teaching in 1926, after the success of his first book on witchcraft allowed him to adopt writing as his full-time occupation. Moving ahead, let's uncover the hidden gems within literary scholarship and discover their significance. While employed as a schoolmaster and with the encouragement of Arthur Henry Bullen of the Shakespearehead Press, Summers established himself as an independent scholar specializing on the dramatic literature of the Stuart Restoration. Summers successively edited the plays of Arthur Ben, William Congreve, William Wycherley, Thomas Otway, Thomas Shadwell, and John Dryden. He also helped to create a new society called the Phoenix that performed those neglected works. Summers' work on the theatre of the Restoration earned him election as Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 1916. Several decades after his death, literary critic and historian Robert D. Hume characterized Montague Summers' scholarship on Restoration drama as pioneering and useful, but also as marred by sloppiness, eccentricity, uncritical deference to Sir Edmund Gosse and other similar gentlemen amateurs, and even occasional dishonesty. Hume judged Summers' studies on the Restoration Theatre 1934 and the Playhouse of Pepys 1935 to be particularly fruitful sources. In his own day, Summers' credibility among university-based scholars was adversely impacted by the acrimonious disputes in which he engaged with others working in the same field. The other major focus of Summers' literary scholarship was Gothic fiction. He edited 3 collections of Gothic horror short stories, as well as an incomplete edition of 2 of the 7 obscure Gothic novels, known as the Northanger Horror novels, that Jane Austen mentioned in her Gothic parody novel Northanger Abbey. He was instrumental in rediscovering those lost works, which some had supposed were inventions of Jane Austen herself. He also published biographies of Austen and Anne Radcliffe, a writer of Gothic fiction. Summers' Gothic bibliography, published in 1940, has been characterized as flawed but useful. Summers compiled 3 anthologies of supernatural stories, the Supernatural Omnibus, the Grimoire and Other Supernatural Stories, and Victorian Ghost Stories. He has been described as the major anthologist of supernatural and Gothic fiction in the Ers. He also edited the poetry of Richard Barnfield, a contemporary of Shakespeare. Summers' introduction to his 1936 edition of Barnfield's poems stressed the homosexual theme of some of those works, particularly The Affectionate Shepherd. Without wasting any more time, let's jump into the fascinating world of the occult. From 1916 onwards, Summers regularly published articles in popular occult periodicals, including the Occult Review and the spiritualist periodical Light. In 1926, his work on the history of witchcraft and demonology appeared as part of the series on History of Civilization published by Kegan Paul and edited by Charles K. Ogden. In the introduction to that book, Summers wrote, "The book sold well and attracted considerable attention in the press. That success made Summers something of a social celebrity and allowed him to give up teaching and write full-time. In 1927, a companion volume, The Geography of Witchcraft, also appeared in Ogden's History of Civilization series. In 1928, Summers published the first English translation of Heinrich Kramer's Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, a 15th Latin manual on the hunting of witches. In his introduction, Summers insists that the reality of witchcraft is an essential part of Catholic doctrine and declares the Malleus an admirable and correct account of witchcraft and of the methods necessary to combat it. In fact, However, the Catholic authorities of the 15th century had condemned the Malleus on both ethical and legal grounds. Other Catholic scholars contemporary with Summers were also highly critical of the Malleus. For instance, the Rev. Herbert Thurston's article on witchcraft for the Catholic Encyclopedia of 1912 refers to the publication of the Malleus as a disastrous episode. After his first works on witchcraft were published, Summers turned his attention to vampires, producing The Vampire, His Kith and Kin 1928 and The Vampire in Europe 1929, and later to werewolves with The Werewolf 1933. In 1933, copies of Summers' translations of the Confessions of Madeleine Babant and of Ludovico Maria Sinistrari's Demonology were seized by the police due to their explicit accounts of sexual intercourse between humans and demons. At the ensuing trial of the publisher for obscene libel, anthropologist East Evans Pritchard testified in defense of the scholarly value of the works in question. The publisher, Reginald Catton, was convicted and the unsold copies destroyed. In the upcoming section, we'll be shining a light on influence. Summers' work on the occult is notorious for his old-fashioned and eccentric writing style, his display of erudition, and his purported belief in the reality of the supernatural subjects he treats. Presented from the perspective of a highly traditionalist Catholicism, Summers' occult scholarship has actually had its greatest influence within modern popular culture. According to historian Juliet Wood, Summers. According to Brian Doherty, Summers' later writings on witchcraft, published in the Urs and Urs, adopted a far more paranoid and conspiracy-driven worldview than his earlier works on the subject. These later writings draw extensively from earlier conspiracy theorists such as the French counter-revolutionary Augustin Béraud and the English fascist Nessa Helen Webster. As such, Summers' work may have influenced the satanic panic of the Urs and Urs. The prominent Catholic historian Geoffrey Burton Russell, a specialist in the religion of the European Middle Ages, wrote in 1972 that, after Christopher South, Wiki published a full translation of the Malleus Maleficarum in 2006. Historian Jonathan Seitz welcomed that new work, noting that, until then, the Malleus had been readily available in English only in the atrocious 1928 translation authored by Montague Summers. Seitz added that to dub Summers an eccentric would be to understate substantially his outsized personality, and his edition reflects his idiosyncrasies. Get ready to uncover the mysteries surrounding antisemitism as we navigate its intriguing terrain. Summers' History of Witchcraft and Demonology 1926 gives credence to various historical accusations that European Jews kidnapped and sacrificed Christian children. Summers wrote that the evidence is quite conclusive that the body, and especially the blood of the victim, was used for magical purposes, and concluded that it was for this practice of the dark and hideous traditions of Hebrew magic and not for the biblical Jewish faith that Jews had been persecuted by Christians in the Middle Ages and in the early modern period. The great majority of historians now reject the view that this blood libel against the Jews had any basis in fact. According to historian Norman Cohn, Summers' writings on witchcraft helped to promote anti-Semitic tropes well after Summers' death. Let's now turn our gaze towards other pursuits and explore the fascinating connections it has to offer. Summers cultivated his reputation for eccentricity. The Times wrote he was in every way a character and in some sort a throwback to the Middle Ages. His biographer, Father Bruckert Sewell, writing under the pseudonym Joseph Jerome, paints the following portrait. Summers wrote works of hagiography on Catherine of Siena and Anthony Maria Zaccaria, but his primary religious interest was always in the occult. While Aleister Crowley, with whom he was acquainted, adopted the persona of a modern-day sorcerer, Summers played the part of the learned Catholic witch hunter. Despite his conservative religiosity, Summers was an active member of the British Society for the Study of Sex Psychology, to which he contributed an essay on the Marquis de Sade. In 1926, Summers advertised in the London Times for a secretary to assist him with his literary work. A young Cyril Connolly responded, but found Summers uncongenial and turned down the position. Connolly privately mocked Summers in blank verse as a sorcerer, a fruity, unfrocked cleric of the 90s, like an old toad that carries in his head the jewel of literature, a puffy satyr that blends his Romish ritual with the filth scrawled on Pompeian pavement. The posthumously published personal diaries of socialite and later conservative politician Sir Henry Channon relate how Channon first met Summers at a dinner party in Summers' honour given by Lady Cunard in January 1928. Channon's diaries then describe a series of visits to Summers' home in Richmond. Channon recounts that, on more than one occasion and at Channon's suggestion, Summers took Channon upstairs to his private chapel after dinner and beat him over the altar. Channon characterized Summers as a lecherous priest, a madman, and as dangerous as he is brilliant, cutting off contact with him after a couple of months. The popular novelist Dennis Wheatley relates that he was introduced to Summers by the journalist and politician Tom Dryburgh while Wheatley was researching occultism for his novel The Devil Rides Out 1934. A weekend visit by Wheatley and his wife to Summers' home in Oresford was cut short by the Wheatleys, who determined never to see the perhaps not so reverend gentleman again. Summers and Wheatley continued to correspond on friendly terms, but Wheatley reportedly based the character of the evil Canon Copicile, in his novel To the Devil a Daughter 1953, on Montague Summers. Montague Summers wrote several original works of fiction, but none of these were published during his lifetime. The unpublished manuscripts include two plays, William Henry, a play in 4 acts, and Piers Gaveston, whose text is now lost and whose title is sometimes listed as Edward II. A number of ghost stories and a short novel, The Bride of Christ, were found among Summers' papers and published long after his death. As we move forward, let's uncover the untold stories and fascinating intricacies of relations with the Catholic Church. Summers presented himself as an uncompromising defender of Catholic orthodoxy, but none of his books on religious subjects was ever published with the approval of Catholic authorities sine nihil obsit and imprimatur. His work on witchcraft attracted very negative comment from an important Catholic scholar, the Jesuit Herbert Thurston, who wrote in 1927 that Father Thurston also called attention to the fact that Summers did not figure in any register as either an Anglican or a Catholic priest, but was instead a literary figure with distinctly decadent tastes. According to Bernard Doherty, Thurston may have been concerned that Summers' writings on witchcraft could have been a mystification akin to the Taxil hoax of the Urs, intended to bring ridicule upon the Catholic Church. Thurston challenged Summers to show to the public that he was really an ordained priest, which Summers failed to do. In 1938, another prominent English Catholic, Ronald Knox, angrily objected to having his own essay on G. Kelvin, Chesterton published in a collection on Great Catholics edited by Claude Williamson, after Knox learned that the book would also include an essay on John Dryden by Montague Summers. In the early years, Summers acted as a private chaplain to Mrs. Ermingerd Greville Nugent, also known as Ermingerd, who was a Catholic convert and neo-Jacobite, founder of the Society of King Charles the Martyr. She was the widow of Patrick Greville Nugent, whose father was the Anglo-Irish aristocrat and politician Lord Greville. Both her only daughter and her husband had died insane, and Mrs. Greville Nugent had been convicted of fraud in 1928 for having obtained money to maintain her elegant lifestyle by writing deceptive begging letters to people whose names had appeared in the newspapers as recent beneficiaries of wills. The Catholic Bishop of Southwark, Peter Amigo, excommunicated Mrs. Greville Nugent for allowing Summers to celebrate Mass in the private oratory at Kingsley Dean, her home in Dulwich. Let's now zoom in on death and uncover the hidden gems that lie within. Montague Summers died at his home in Richmond, Surrey in August 1948. The Catholic rector of St. Elizabeth of Portugal Church refused a public requiem mass, but allowed instead a private graveside ceremony. Summers' grave in Richmond Cemetery was unmarked until the late years, when Sandy Robertson and Edwin Pouncey organized the Summers Project to garner donations for a gravestone. It now bears his favored phrase, "Tell me strange things." Summers bequeathed his estate and papers to his longtime personal secretary and companion Hector Stuart Forbes, who was later buried in the same plot as Summers. An autobiography of Summers was published posthumously in 1980 as The Glanty Show, though it left much unrevealed about the author's life. In the years, many of Summers' personal papers were rediscovered in Canada, where they had been kept by members of Stuart Forbes's family. A collection of Summers' papers is now at the Georgetown University Library. Brace yourself for an in-depth analysis as we navigate through books on the occult and its far-reaching implications. The History of Witchcraft and Demonology, 1926 reprinted The Geography of Witchcraft, 1927 reprinted The Vampire, His Kith and Kin, a critical edition, 1928 reprinted by Sennett in 1993 Simply The Vampire, reprinted with alternate title, Vampires and Vampirism, edited by John Edgar Browning The Vampire in Europe, a critical edition, 1929 reprinted with alternate title, The Vampire in Lore and Legend, edited by John Edgar Browning The Werewolf, 1933 reprinted with alternate title, The Werewolf in Lore and Legend A Popular History of Witchcraft, 1937 Witchcraft and Black Magic, 1946 reprinted, The Physical Phenomena of Mysticism, 1947. As we enter this new phase, let's uncover the impact of poetry and drama on our broader topic. Antinous and Other Poems, 1907 William Henry play, 1939, unpublished Piers Gaveston play, 1940, unpublished. Our focus now turns to fiction anthologies edited by Summers, an important aspect of our discussion. The Grimoire and Other Supernatural Stories, 1936 The Supernatural Omnibus, 1947. In the following segment, we'll be examining other books in greater detail. Street Catherine of Siena, 1903 Lords, 1904 A Great Mistress of Romance, Anne Radcliffe, 1917 Jane Austen, 1919 Street Antonia Maria's Coria, 1919 Essays in Petto, 1928 Architecture and the Gothic Novel, 1931 The Restoration Theatre, 1934 The Playhouse of Pepys, 1935 The Gothic Crest, A History of the Gothic Novel, 1938 A Gothic Bibliography, 1941 Copyright 1946 Ghost Stories, 1938, not published until October 2019 The Bride of Christ and Other Fictions, posthumous, 2019. In the following section, we'll be immersing ourselves in the captivating world of as editor or translator. Works of Mrs. Afraben, 1915 Complete Works of Congreve, 1923 Complete Works of Wyke Early, 1924 The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, 1924 The Complete Works of Thomas Shadwell, 1927 Covent Garden Drury, 1927 Horrid Mysteries by the Marquis de Grosse, 1927 part of an incomplete edition of the Northanger Horrid Novels. The Necromancer, or The Tale of the Black Forest by Ludwig Flammenberg, 1927 part of an incomplete edition of the Northanger Horrid Novels. Demonology by Ludovico Maria Sinistrari, 1927 The Malleus Maleficarum of Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, 1928 The Discovery of Witches, 1928 by Matthew Hawkins reprinted Compendium Maleficarum by Francesco Maria Guazzo, translated by E. A. Ashwin, 1929 Demonology by Nicholas Remy, translated by E. A. Ashwin, 1930 The Supernatural Omnibus, 1931 reprinted Dryden, The Dramatic Works, 1931-32 Victorian Ghost Stories, 1936 The Poems of Richard Bonfield, 1936 The Complete Works of Thomas Otway, 1936 Gothic Bibliography, 1940. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update from my channel.